suggesting for a moment, are you, that patients would come along to us and try and bribe us with a bottle of champagne at Christmas to get their hip done before their neighbour?
We're going to be bought off.
Wow.
And it will lead to a bastardised American system.
Yeah, but that's a political point,
I know,
because you're suspicious of the present
we
government.
We haven't been asked to answer political points until now. But doctors and GPs are going to now have to start thinking about making political decisions.
It's not a political decision to decide priorities for your patients, do you think?
No.
Family doctors in Kenneth Clarke's constituency at odds over the government's radical changes to the health service. Exposing doctors to market forces and giving them budgets is dividing the profession.
So we've got to start asking the question, what is the improved quality of life you get for every pound you spend?
The position that I'm going to be in if these proposals are implemented is that I'm not only going to be able to advocate on behalf of some patients, I'm going to be able to back that up with money. Yeah. If I can back that up with money for some patients, unless the budget is extremely generous and basically unlimited, I can't back it up for every patient, and that's the problem.
You have to make choices and be a big boy and grow up.
Well,
that's important. I mean, at the moment, all you can do is talk. With a budget, you can actually do something. Instead of saying, I'm sorry, Mrs. Smith, I can't get your hip done, write to your MP, you can say, look, I promise you, April the 1st, we get a new budget, I will get your hip done. So you can actually do something.
Yes, but I can do it for some patients.
Yes.
For some patients.
Yes, you must make the decision who's important, and they all have priorities. And that's important that you take you grasp that nettle of responsibility.
Right, but that does fundamentally change the doctor-patient relationship.
So what?
Those divisions between partners are now reflected among all Britain's doctors. Although the surface dignity was unruffled when the family doctors' academic body, the Royal College of GPs, met in council in London last Friday, misgivings were apparent in their cautious examination of the government's reforms.
We now come to the item on the white paper and on the contract.
The chairman's confidential report spoke of the most radical realignment in 75 years, leading to probable commercialisation of the NHS, all produced by the Prime Minister's review without consulting the profession.
As everybody here knows, we had not been party in any way to consultation on the white paper or to any of the negotiations which had taken place between the Department of Health and the General Medical Services Committee.
The profession has only 6 weeks to give its views on the proposals. Yet already, opinion polls are telling the government they're deeply unpopular.
Hello.
It all seems sweeter for Kenneth Clarke a month ago when the Health Secretary reckoned he'd have to win the battle in the first 3 days. Winding up his promotional roadshow in Nottingham, he'd hired a television studio to accommodate an audience of senior health service officers. They hadn't been consulted either, and were now told they'd have only until May to discuss the reform's implementation. So it was perhaps surprising they'd accepted to be extras in the government's £1.25 million PR exercise. Certainly Mr. Clarke was given no warning then of the uproar to come.
I would like to express, I know on behalf of a lot of people, a very great appreciation for this exercise in mass communication.
But behind the courtesies, there was keen awareness the government had taken a big political gamble with the NHS. The Prime Minister had put her signature to the white paper, and the government's video aimed at NHS staff had its own star presenter.
We believe that a national health service that is run better will be a national health service that can care better. I'm confident that all who work in it will grasp these opportunities to provide even better health care for the millions and millions of people who rely on the National Health Service.
The government's message put all the emphasis on patients.
What they want is better service, higher quality, and more choice. And the NHS must strive to keep its methods and its management
system. The new entrepreneurial message for the 90s was unmistakable.
Of course, the NHS is not a business run for profit, but it can become more business-like.
The broad-brush white paper raised questions which still weren't answered in 8 working papers. Controversy centres on practice budgets for GPs. In large practices, doctors could for the first time take control of NHS funds for their patients and shop around for specified treatments. These new GP budgets would pay for some non-urgent operations, which doctors could also buy in private hospitals, outpatient treatments and drug prescriptions.
I think the government have been very brave to actually tackle some long overdue problems in this reform. The problems of actually measuring what doctors do, of finding out what it costs to do things to patients. These are all pieces of information which have been noticeably absent and which the medical profession have been rather opposed to people digging up and inquiring about. So what the government is doing is something quite bold in that it is beginning to inquire about the efficiency with which healthcare is provided, and that's long overdue.
We'll be concentrating tonight on how the changes affect us, the patients, beginning right here in the doctor's waiting room. Britain's 30,000 odd GPs are generally our first point of contact with the NHS. They see each of us on average 4 times a year. GPs, in fact, manage the greater part of acute and chronic illness. The government's biggest change will affect the way doctors act on our behalf in getting us treatment, a change which goes to the heart of the doctor-patient relationship. The government says the changes mean new opportunities. Others see them as needless upheaval. Just outside Nottingham, Kenneth Clarke's constituency of Rushcliffe is a mixture of well-heeled suburb and rural villages. A good proportion of the patients here are believed by GPs to have private medical insurance. But among those who don't is this retired headmaster. He admires Mrs. Thatcher. Indeed, they have one medical complaint in common, Dupuytren's contracture in the hands, but his was repaired on the NHS. Now he's fully operational in the garden again, but for the first time in the Prime Minister's 10 years in office, he's perplexed by the government.
I start from a position of some political difficulty because I'm a Conservative voter. I voted Conservative all my life. I voted for Ken Clarke, my local MP, in the last election. But when I look at these proposals, I'm filled with some worry and, in some areas, quite a lot of alarm. The whole idea of a budget for a general practice, I think, is a worrying one. To illustrate that, may I quote one phrase in this Working for Patients? It was an unusual phrase to find in a white paper, but I thought a Friday one. It reads, "There will be a downward pressure on the cost of drug prescription." When I've been to my doctor in the past, one word that has never come into his mind while he's making that decision has been the word money. He hasn't thought about it at all. When I go to see him next time, if my practice opts out, he may well be saying, "Well, this is Mr. Timpson. He's got a heart condition. Now what can we do? Now there's this new marvellous drug, XRJ25748-2 or something like that, would solve all his problems." And he'll reach for his pen, and then he'll pause. Very costly, though. Mustn't embark on prescribing drugs which cost as much as this. It's going to cause great difficulties within our budget. He'll be thinking of his budget, I fear, rather than Mr. Timpson.
For the first time, you are going to have a cash or a cost-related element in the relationship between you and the patient. Does that concern you?
No, I think that's the way it should be. I think really that this is... I think for too long GPs have been allowed to write open cheques. I haven't the faintest idea how much money I'm spending, and it's public money. And I think I should be accountable, and I think my patients want me to be accountable.
Oh, Lord, who's taken...
The Annesley partners run a large enough practice to become one of the first to get GP budgets.
9 o'clock.
Computerised business management is what the government wants of these large practices, which cover about a quarter of the country's population. Providing they can demonstrate business acumen, these family doctors would get about £700,000 of NHS money to manage a list of 11,000 patients. The budget would cover an X-ray, or, for those willing to travel to jump the queue, an operation in a cheaper hospital, even a private clinic. Overspending doctors could see their budgets cut.
Right. Open your mouth wide.
Savings may be ploughed back, though not into doctors' pockets.
That's a good girl. The white paper states categorically that I can't use the savings from my own pocket. I can't buy myself a Porsche new car, and I'm pleased about that because I wouldn't like patients to think that I was trying to save money in order to buy myself a new Jaguar. So we can't do that. What we can do with the money is use it for the benefit of patients in our practice. Now that could be that we could improve the waiting area. It could be that we would spend the money on a very deserving old lady and send her into a hospital to have a private operation. If I had several £1,000s spare and I had a very deserving case, there is nothing to stop me saying, I will send this lady to a private hospital to have her hip done. She's been waiting a long time. I think she's a very deserving case and she's welcome to have that done on our budget.
What's that going to do to your relationship with other patients who say, what's he doing sending people on NHS money to private hospitals?
It's going to cause me a lot of problems, really, but it's something that I think I can live with.
I would like to see our patients balloted. And if that isn't going to be through a general election, I am prepared to bear the costs of that myself, or the practice to bear those costs. And if the patients decided by any sort of recognised democratic majority that is what they wanted, well then so be it. And I will very happily go along with that, the patient's decision.
If there is no ballot, and we've heard that you have expressed your opinions very passionately in against aspects of the system, what is that going to lead you to decide in the end, do you think?
You're asking me basically whether I'm going to resign on this issue. Perhaps that's one option that I would have. The fact that these proposals can make me think about that, I think, is tragic. I really do believe that it's going to lead to the end of the NHS, ultimately. And I think that is what the government must see, and it all fits together. They haven't said it in the white paper. In fact, they've gone out of their way to spend £1 million in not saying that. But the way I read between the lines of this, I'm going to be asset stripped. I think this practice is an asset to the NHS, and I think it's going to be asset stripped.
I view the Conservative Party as a caring party, as well as one that's interested in the operation of private market forces and so on. And I would have thought that this would have been outside the realm of financial considerations. This pamphlet is called Working for Patients. I'm not a cynical man, but I think a better title perhaps might have been Working for Profit, because it's more about profit, really, at the end of the day, this pamphlet, than about patients, I think.
Nonsense, says the government. It's not NHS PLC that's the aim, but NHS value for money. To get it, doctors are being put on a tighter rein.
My own view is, having studied it, Chairman, is that no doctor who's doing a good job of work or has got a good explanation has got anything to worry about. But they may well be.
In Nottingham, as elsewhere, family practitioner committees already supervise GPs. In future, these committees will get greater powers but fewer members in a tough, small management team. In future, GPs will be answerable to the committee for their budgets and their clinical performance. Already, Nottingham has drawn up computer comparisons of GP services. It's a tiny foretaste of the massive computer networks the government plans for the whole health service, in which a price will be put on everything. Until now, GPs have been the one part of the health service that hasn't had government cash limits. All that will change.
Your practice, besides being 17% down on cardiovascular...
The committee officer's friendly call to monitor Dr. Annesley's drugs bill foreshadows how the future NHS will work. Then all GPs will face that downward pressure on prescribing costs, and overspending on drugs could even lead to the docking of doctors' pay. Such money pressures could also, it's feared, lead to patient suspicions.
It is going to cause problems where doctors are rightly saying, well, that is more economical prescription for you. And the patient views that with suspicion. Now, how you get rid of suspicion? Suspicion will always be there. And that is the point. That's the point I see trouble. That's the point where we're likely to get complaints that Dr. Bloggs won't prescribe something for me. I've always had it from Dr. So-and-so down the road before. Why can't I have it?
Alfie Richards, a disco bouncer in Nottingham, already complains about his prescriptions. He's among a generation brought up to see the NHS as the universal provider against illness based on need, regardless of cost. But the government insists if the tune's changed, the music hasn't stopped. The NHS will still be there. But Alfie, who had a heart attack and 2 strokes before he was 20, now finds that his doctor has changed the prescription he gets for his asthma. It'll be hard for the government to persuade people like him that where health is concerned, cheaper doesn't mean worse. Now, what's the problem you have at the moment?
I suffer from asthmatic.
And how are you treated for that?
Well, I was a Ventolin inhaler, but now I'm taking a cheaper brand, salbutamol.
I see. And what's the difference?
One's cheaper than the other one. This is a Ventolin one, which is, I think, they're £3. And this is a salbutamol, and they're £2, I think. That was the last time we were told. And the only reason I've got prescribed these, the salbutamol, because it's £1 cheaper.
Is that what the doctor told you?
Yeah, I asked him why was it switched. He says, because the government has stated it's got to prescribe a cheaper drug for me.
Now, is there any difference as far as you're concerned?
Oh, yeah, you can tell the difference. With the salbutamol, the Ventolin is it works a lot quicker. With the salbutamol, you have to take a lot more and I use twice as much just to keep me going through the day when I need it.
And what did he say when you said you wanted to change back to the one that you think is better?
When I said I wanted to change back to the Ventolin, he says you can't. Through the government, they just said that you've got to prescribe a cheaper drug.
In fact, the government can't compel doctors to prescribe cheaper drugs, but misunderstandings by patients, Alfie's own doctor maintains, can only worsen once GPs get their own budgets.
There are going to be patients who think that they are denied treatment because we are down to our limit on our budget for that particular month or that particular year. And this is going to cause a great change in the doctor-patient relationship. Instead of being on their side, we'll be on the government side. And this concerns me and my colleagues a great deal. They will look on us as being agents to the government, depriving them of care, instead of working the other way around and ensuring that they get the best care.
Dr. Sprackling's inner-city Nottingham practice sees little advantage in getting its own budget.
There you are, Miss Merrick.
Hello.
Did the nurse come and see you this morning?
Yes.
But he fears that he and his patients will lose out if they don't. GPs who don't take budgets will lose their right to refer patients to consultants of their choice. They'd have to go where their health authority had contracts to bulk buy its operations. Rather than giving patients more choice, as the government claims, Sprackling fears that his patients could end up with less.
I think there's many things in this white paper that are actually against patient choice. If we have a contract and a budget to send all our patients with cataracts to Hospital A, we are actually eliminating hospitals B and C. Therefore, we are reducing patient choice. The same is true with any other specialty. If we elect to have all our hip replacements done in London because there's a lower waiting list, we're actually then constraining our patients to go to London when it might be far more convenient and cost-effective for them to stay in Nottingham, even if they had to wait another 6 months.
So, patient choice?
Patient choice doesn't exist.
The patient never had a choice to get NHS services from a private hospital before. I think there are going to be a lot of areas in Britain where they'll be able to sample private hospital care on the NHS. That's a new choice.
Dr. Goldsmith is a GP who resigned from the health service to campaign for PLC-style competition in healthcare. An enthusiastic recruit to the Tory think tank set up by Mrs. Thatcher, he's had inside influence on her NHS review. The buzzwords now are trading and deals in the health market, with NHS money following the patients.
Wider choices are coming in the new system, whereby he will actually be able to send money with the patient. So he can make a contract with several hospitals, not just one, not just the local one. If he's a budget holder, he can decide, and he may want to split his budget for hips into 3 different hospitals, or 4, if he can get the right sort of deal. And then he can give the sort of choice to the patient, where he says, look, you can either have your hip done tomorrow in the hospital 40 miles away, who've got some spare beds, and they're very high quality, and I recommend them. Or if you want to go to the local hospital because Granny can't get to visit you in 40 miles away, you can wait a year and go to the local hospital. Now, that's a choice, and that's a new choice.
New patient choice, the government maintains, will come through self-governing hospitals. In 2 years' time, hospitals may opt to become NHS trusts and run their own affairs on business lines, competing with other NHS hospitals for patients. The big change, the government claims, is that they no longer run out of money and have to close wards because the more patients they treat, the more money, in theory, the hospitals would get from the NHS. It's the government's other radical proposal. Nottingham has two big hospitals that could go self-governing. Until now, city and university hospitals have worked together, planning hospital services that dovetail. From now on, the government wants such hospitals to compete on business lines, all in the stated aim, difficult to combine, of better treatment and cost-effectiveness. Already here, the NHS enterprise culture is being force-fed. The bottom line is costing every treatment in a way the NHS has never bothered to. Nottingham's part of a crash project. The task? To see whether in 2 years' time it's feasible to get all 260 big NHS hospitals interlinked in new computer networks. The cost must come from NHS savings. But if the government decides it can be done, 2 of these installed in every hospital could end up totalling not far short of £1 billion. Without computers, the precisely costed health market can hardly begin to produce the promised advantages.
The advantages are that the hospital will have to become more responsive to the patient's needs because it will only be paid for the work that it does. And the medical staff in particular will welcome the greater degree of devolution that this will bring with it, that the money will actually be spent where the work is done.
Is it realistic to expect that a self-governing hospital, you'd be able to give the same level of service to your National Health Service patients as you do today with your private patients?
I think that this would be everybody's ultimate objective. Private patients don't get better treatment than National Health Service patients. The problem at the moment is that National Health Service patients don't get it quite so promptly.
7 days after her hip fracture, and she's not as enthusiastic about walking as she should be.
No, not.
No.
Waiting lists are as embarrassing to Nottingham's orthopaedic consultants as they are politically embarrassing to the government. While teaching students on his rounds, Professor Wallace has 258 people on his operations waiting list, 100 of them for longer than a year. For him, the government's claim the reform should help tackle waiting lists has missed the vital point.
There is very little that can be gained further from efficiencies in the use of medical time. And I would estimate that in order for the orthopaedic services in this country to be provided at a rate which is appropriate for this country, we would have to double the number of orthopaedic surgeons over the next 5 to 10 years.
But such increases aren't part of the government's package. Instead, the government wants private hospitals like this one outside Nottingham to expand and help ease the patient load on the NHS, taking some NHS money in the process.
Okay.
But catch-22 for surgeons and government is that often the same consultants are doing the operations in the private clinics as in the NHS hospitals. This heart operation was taking place in the evening. If the government wishes the rate of operations to be stepped up with only a small increase in the total surgeons, something has to give.
People tend to forget that the consultant treating them as a private patient is exactly the same consultant who is working in the health service. He happens to set aside his free time to treat patients privately.
But the White Paper proposes that the new self-governing trust hospital would be free to pay more for staff, including consultants, to treat more patients. It doesn't say where the extra money's coming from. All the government's offering is roughly the same amount of NHS money, but they'd expect to get more out of it by unleashing competition for patients between hospitals. This is what the government calls the internal market. But unless more money is put into the NHS, there'll be losers as well as gainers.
Our concern is likely to be, if we don't become a trust hospital, are we therefore going to fall significantly behind?
When you say fall behind, you mean if you weren't a trust hospital, you might get fewer resources, do you think?
I think that's inevitable from what Kenneth Clarke is saying. He is saying that he does not want to put much more money into healthcare. He is saying that he's going to put more money into specific hospitals which are efficient and produce good quality medical care. If you're going to do that, you remove money from other hospitals.
Some of the less well-managed hospitals will start to show signs of creaking at the seams. And the government can do two things. They can let them go. They can actually say, OK, you're doing very badly. You chose to go down this route, and now you're going to go. And that hopefully would be some of the bad Victorian workhouse type hospital, the things that government was phasing out anyway. New capital building is required, a nice new hospital. So they might let some of the really old fabric hospitals go. But what is more likely is that bad management will be replaced with good management. So if a hospital is doing badly, is a loser, the management will be looked at and they'll be told, well, you've just got to get your act together.
In Nottingham, which is relatively well provided for, Kenneth Clarke's reforms offer opportunity, yet still the profession is divided. But a stone's throw from Westminster in inner London comes the acid test for the government's reforms. How will they sustain, let alone improve, healthcare for the people who need the NHS most? An emergency at King's College Hospital in Camberwell. In the new health market, anyone from outside the district requiring emergency admission to a bed would in future have their own health district billed for treatment. What won't change, says the white paper, is the principle of immediate emergency care without question.
Apparently she came home from work complaining of headache.
No tablets in?
No, and then she just killed straight over. She's slightly irritable.
No history.
At King's Emergency, without question, patients' needs come first. This young woman was taken to the resuscitation bay, which is always kept free. She had the most expert treatment available. The question of cost never came into it.
It's a respiration, all right. I mean, she's breathing all right.
What's a respiratory rate?
It was the NHS at its best, but in the end, they couldn't save her.
And a clinical estimate of death, I mean, she's simply silent.
At its worst are the conditions in which the King's casualty staff heroically try to meet rising demand. It was scenes like this which a year ago led Mrs. Thatcher to try breaking out of the old NHS. Despite the billions more put in, it still left places like King's underfunded. Worse, government spending limits forced ward closures, so patients here back up on trolleys for up to 12 hours waiting for beds.
Have you got any male beds? I'm told there's a couple on one of your surgical wards. They've gone.
At King's, doctors say that though they're not afraid of competing in the new NHS market, the government would first have to meet the bill to rebuild their hospital and so ease the crisis.
Any prospect of coming up? None at all. OK, thanks very much. All right, bye-bye. No beds.
There is no way in which the environment that we currently practice medicine here can be competitive with our neighbours. We are grossly underfunded.
Does that mean that, in your view, King's College Hospital could not, in its present state, become a self-governing National Health Service Trust hospital?
My belief is that unless we have new facilities, we could not provide what the government demands in its white paper.
King's also contains several centres of excellence. This one, the liver unit, separately NHS funded, part privately equipped for research. It's a national asset, one of only 4 liver transplant units in the country.
And you don't think we'll have to go on to a transplant or anything for her?
I don't think so.
The liver unit's intricately interlinked with the whole NHS and with King's. Were the government to allow it to be hived off, it would split the hospital staff and specialists.
Would you like the liver transplant unit to, on its own, if you like, become independently run, a separate National Health Service Trust?
Well, I may get into difficulty with my colleagues here, but personally, it has to be separately run because we provide a highly specialist service and facilities for liver disease, and particularly the transplantation, for which Britain is making a very major role in the world in this area. And for liver failure and for these other specialist services. So certainly, whatever arrangements King's come to, there's no question that the liver work is going to be separately controlled and funded along the lines I think that the white paper indicate, because we're not going to go backwards on what's been a very big development forwards.
What would be the impact on the teaching hospital, on the district general hospital, if parts of it, say like the liver unit, went off on their own?
Yes. Well, I think that that's the key issue, and I think that what I would say is that I came to work in this institution firstly because it's in the National Health Service, and secondly because it's a teaching hospital. And if either of those roles were threatened, they would threaten the existence of the hospital. I see myself as working primarily for the local community and as a teacher, and I think that any attempt to prune out what is best and to focus and and spend money on that at the expense of the local district service would be abhorrent to the majority of my colleagues.
King's local community is the heart of Old South London. Like most inner cities, it's settled near the bottom of the heap in social deprivation. It's not a place where the economy's done very well out of exposure to market forces. The fears are real that it would be blighted in the new health market too. Already its community health services for the growing numbers of elderly and the chronically sick are stretched beyond the point of overload. In some of the tougher parts of Camberwell and Peckham, whatever the government's assurances, patients worry about losing what's familiar in the NHS and being stuck with worsening healthcare. At a large GP's practice which runs surgeries in 3 locations, they've more than enough patients to qualify to get their own budget. But the partners would rather concentrate on managing their patients than managing their funds. And they're concerned that for the first time, family doctors will face government cash limits with penalties for overspending. That could discourage doctors from taking on the sort of chronic patients whose care might turn out to be a liability.
If you have the choice of managing 20 existing families on your list for the same cost as 1 new patient on your list, and there are financial penalties for overspending on your budget, it would be very difficult to logically place a patient within your practice who is going to be a financial liability to the entire practice. None of this has ever entered our management of patients before. We have always managed patients wholly in what we consider to be their best interests.
One of those patients on Dr. K's list is Sid Osborne. He's a former docker who's been invalided at 50 through a succession of illnesses. He can't praise his GPs highly enough, but he worries that the government's reforms can only make things worse for people like him with multiple complaints. If your doctor's practice becomes a budget-holding practice, what do you think is going to happen to patients like you?
Well, London Borough of Southwark got a dustbin unit. I suppose that's where we'll all end up because no one will want us. Now, I've been getting worse over the years with my illnesses. Now, if I get worse still, sorry to use that word, what are they going to say to me, Mr. Osborne? You're costing us £50,000 a year as one person in this surgery. I can treat 200 people in this surgery for that same amount of money. So what happens to me? Are there going to be special clinics for the chronically ill?
Dr. K's home visits take him to some of Peckham's starkest estates. To counter these inner-city worries, the government insists it's going to give doctors like him special payments to compensate for their greater burden of old and chronically sick patients.
How's it been going since you came out of hospital?
Despite the government's assurance to maintain core services locally, Dr. K fears that if nearby hospitals opt out and advertise for patients from across the country, they may have little incentive to offer the care his patients need.
My particular worry is geriatrics within the community. This is an area where we don't need single one-off operations. We don't need hip replacements. We don't need knee replacements or abdominal operations. What we need is advice from our hospital colleagues on the management of chronic patients in the community.
Can you lift that knee up? Now I'm going to press down on it. I want to see if you can...
Peter Baker had a stroke on Christmas Day. Fortunately, he was rapidly treated at Dulwich Hospital. 8 weeks later, a final examination before returning home.
Sorry, I mean outwards like that.
Keeping the elderly independent is a key advance in geriatrics.
See what movement you can do with your foot. Can you bring it up towards you?
It's not, however, the sort of care that would earn much for the new self-governing hospitals.
Good.
The physiotherapy has done me a lot of good. They've taught me things that I didn't know I could do, and I've mastered some of the things myself without their help, but it is necessary. They've watched me doing it, and they said it should be sufficient.
I think most of the effort has been yours, though.
Oh, well, I was determined determined to try and do as much as I could for myself to save. I was worried about the wife and my boys.
Unless there is a great deal more detailed planning of the kind of services that elderly people need than is apparent from the review and the working papers so far, I think the prospects are very dismal. I don't think that the private sector has any real interest in providing care for elderly people because it is complex, costly, and tends to be long-term.
You probably read that Mrs. Thatcher says that all these white paper proposals are aimed at bringing the rest of the National Health Service up to the standards of the best. What's your opinion of that?
I don't see the safeguards written into the documents to ensure that that happens. Funding is going to move to the best places. Therefore, if a place is now not absolutely in the first rank, how is it going to attract funding to improve? It seems to me that to those who have is going to be given, and to those who do not, even that is going to be taken away.
The assertion that the white paper won't bring the extra funding to ease problems at old hospitals like these dominated a protest meeting at King's last Thursday.
The government, as you know, has issued its white paper on the future of the health service.
Is somebody reading?
Local MPs have been brought together with doctors, hospital staff, consultants and union leaders and patients to discuss what the local Community Health Council termed a crisis at King's.
Now, what we want is King's to be able to carry on providing, and the district to carry on providing in this district a whole range of district services.
Now, Harriet mentioned the white paper. There's a significant omission from the white paper. It's like a jigsaw with parts missing. And the part missing is the community care.
We care deeply, we work hard, we're enormously effective with the resources we have. What we want is more.
Such anxiety at hospitals fuels Labour's attempt to pin on the government the charge that it's preparing to privatise the health service. But there are also voices in the profession who warn that if the reforms fail, then the way to NHS Plc will be open.
If the government, God forbid, wrecked the NHS, how could they privatise it? It would be impossible. Who would want to buy or run a private service that doesn't work? So it's quite the reverse. The better the NHS gets, the more the private sector will be looking over its shoulder. It'll be competed against. You know, the better, stronger the NHS is, the more people want to use it and not need to have any privatised service. This is the whole point of this reform, is to make sure that the quality is improved.
I think you can develop two scenarios. The one is the optimistic scenario that all will go well, that they'll be able to manage costs, they'll be able to get good quality health care, and things will be much better in 5 years. The other scenario is a pessimistic scenario, and it sees a cost explosion of quite some significant sort, the erosion of the quality of care.
And what would happen to the NHS?
Well, what one can see is a two-tier service beginning to evolve, where those who are willing and able to pay will buy private insurance, and they will get better quality care in public and private facilities, in opted-out NHS hospitals and in the private sector pay beds. What will happen for the rest of the population, who simply do not have the willingness and ability to pay, who are poor, well, they'll be left in the residue of the National Health Service.
Successfully treated after his stroke, Peter Baker leaves hospital to continue his recovery at home. The government's commitment to the health service faces this test. It must prove that the disciplines of business and the market are the best way to continue universal health care into the next century, and are not, as many still fear, a threat to its survival.